Hello everyone, welcome to another tutorial. So in this particular video, I'll be covering on Redux. So let's get started. Now, what I will be covering in this particular part of the video is that first of all, I would like to walk you through what is Redux and the benefits of using Redux in our React projects. And also, I'll be walking you guys through on how to implement Redux into a React project. So what is Redux? So first of all, Redux is actually a state management library, which is basically the same as a useState function. We happen to have this useState hook where we're able to set a value to a particular variable using useState, and we can also change the initial value we were given earlier to a useState variable. And that's basically what does state management library literally means. But what's the difference between Redux and how is it different from a typical useState function? Is that it's able to be accessed across your entire React project. And because useState can only be accessed within one file or one component, but using Redux you can actually change the variable, or we can just update the variable, or we can also at least access the variable across the entire React project. So that's how it is different from useState function. And also it provides a centralized store to hold the application's data, which means you are able to access it directly from this particular file called store across the entire project. And we also need to be learning about these two new terms called actions, which actually describes what changes to make to a particular Redux variable. And also we also need to be learning about reducers. Reducers is what handles the action to update the store's state. So this is the most key points on what does Redux is actually all about. And this is basically the diagram flow of how does React actually works. Now, as you can see right here, we happen to have this particular store right here, and this store happens to be having this particular state. And this state is where is considered like the data that can be accessed in the UI. And the UI can be accessed from multiple components at the same time. So inside store, we also happen to have reducer. So reducer is where we actually were able to handle the actions that we would like to do to the particular state, this particular state right here. And as you can see right here, once we have already configured that in our store, we are able to be accessed in the UI. So once we happen to have the UI, like this particular data right here, and you're able to access the UI, and also you can actually change the data that is being fetched from the Redux. So in order to change that particular data, you must be using dispatch function right here. So using dispatch function, you're able to change the value of the Redux variable that has been fixed inside store. So that's the basic idea of what does Redux means. And these are the benefits of using Redux, which are predictable state management, easy state sharing, and code organization. And next, let's actually start implementing Redux in our React project. So first of all, we'll be looking through the installation process. And of course, the first step is to set up the Redux store, then creating the reducers, and also apply the Redux value in multiple components. That's what I'll be walking you guys through at the last stage of this particular Redux project. So let's get started. Alright, I already happen to have a simple counter UI right here. This is just basically an H1 tag and a H2 tag, and there's two buttons right here. This is basically a simple UI. And I'll be using this to show you how are we able to make use of Redux. So first of all, the first step is to install the Redux. So I have to go to a new tab, and I'll be typing Redux. And just go for this particular link right here. And of course, you need to be clicking on Get Started right here, and look for this particular installation where it says npm install Redux.js toolkit. And not just that, we also need to be installing npm install Redux, the core file. So this too is the one that we will be using to install the dependencies that is coming from Redux. So in our code right here, I have to go to the terminal. I have to paste npm install Redux.js /toolkit and also Redux, just like this. And we just need to be clicking enter, and there you go. You have already installed those two dependencies, which are Redux.js toolkit and Redux, and we just stack it in our package.json file right here. All you have to do is just need to expand this, and there you go, Redux.js toolkit and also Redux right here. And there you go. So right now we have already installed those two dependencies, and the next step is to actually set up the Redux store. So that's basically the following step. And in our code right here, just need to go to our source file right here. I'll have to create a new folder called store. And inside this folder, I'll have to create an index.js file. And this is a file where we're able to create the store. So first of all, I have to import configure store. So this is where we are able to call the function for a store. Just say import configure store and just select the first option right here. And once we have done that, we can actually call a variable called store, constant store like this. And this is where we are able to use this particular function that we have imported at the top right here, configure store. And inside this function where we are able to have two main parameters, which are the reducers and the initial state. So I have to open this particular function. It's going to be a curly braces. And right at the first step here, we will be calling reducer. So reducer is not actually created yet. So I'm just going to put it like this with an empty object, just like this. And of course, I'll be also like having an initial state right below reducers. And also with an empty object, right, just like this. And of course, I must be exporting the store so that we're able to call it in our app.jsx. So first of all, I have to have export default store. And there you go. Right now, we have already just made a simple store with just like empty objects right here, which are reducer and initial like this. And next, we will be creating this particular reducers. So let's create reducers. And inside our store folder right here, I'll have to create a new folder called reducers, just like this. And of course, inside the reducers folder, I have to create a new file. And this file is going to be called counter reducer.js. And there you go. Just need to be placing it on our site right here. And this is going to be the place where we create reducers. So reducers are basically the function that have the methods on how to edit this particular variable in your initial state basically. So right in our reducer file right here, I like to import create slice function, which is also coming from Redux.js toolkit. And there you go. Just select this. And of course, we need to be creating a variable called counter slice. And this is basically the function to make the change to a particular variable. So first of all, I have to call the function called create slice. And this function will also be having, there will be three main arguments. First of all, it's going to be the name of this particular reducer. And this reducer is going to be called counter. And besides that, we also need to be having initial state. So initial state where we're able to have the variable at the beginning of the particular process. So I'm just going to call initial state like this. And instead of just calling it inside here, and I'm just going to say count like this. So count will be equals to 0. And besides that, the next thing is that I like to have reducers like this. So this reducer is where I like to have the increment and the decrement of the counter. We're going to create an object like this, an object like this. And the first thing is increment. So increment is actually a function, and this function should be having the code to change the value of the initial state. And also, I like to also call decrement right below here. And this decrement will also be having a code just to reduce the number of counter. So how are we able to do that for increment and decrement? So first of all, I of course need to be calling the parameter of this particular function. So I'm just going to say state. And this particular increment is just going to increase the value of state by 1. So I'm just going to say state dot count. So count is basically the initial state you can see at the top right here. And of course, I'm just going to be making sure to plus 1 like this. By doing like this, we're able to just keep on adding 1 to the state right here. And yeah, and the same thing applies for this particular decrement as well, where I just need to be calling the state as the parameter. And inside here, I like to just copy and just paste it right here, and we can just make it as a minus instead of plus, so that way we're able to reduce the value of the current state, by the way. And of course, once we have already done the functions, we're able to export the function. Just need to copy counter slice and just put it right below at the most bottom right here. Just say export constant, and I'm just going to be specifying the functions as well. In this case, I'm going to call increment and also decremer like this. And these two functions are actually coming from counter slice dot actions, just like this. So this is basically how we are able to destruct the value that's coming from counter slice dot actions, and we're just directly able to access it from here. And besides that, we also need to export the counter slice as a reducer. So in this case, I have to call export default counter slice dot reducer like this. And by doing this, we're able to export the counter slice as a reducer. So we're able to access both of these functions. And right now we're able to have this particular reducers and the store to be accessed in our main.jsx right here. Just need to be having set this main.jsx. We need to be wrapping the entire app right here with a provider, and that provider will be having a props for store. So let's actually do that. So let's import provider first. And this particular provider is actually coming from React followed by dash Redux right here. And if you don't actually find this particular React Redux extension, you're able to install it just by going to our terminal and just type npm install React Redux like this, and then we're able to have this particular React Redux to be installed to our package.json. And once we have done that, we're able to have this particular provider to be used. First of all, I need to create this particular provider first. I have to wrap this entire app with this particular provider component. So in this case, I have to have this particular provider component like this, and I just need to be placing the app inside the provider component. And there you go. And not just that, we need to be inserting the store that we have just created inside the provider so that it will be able to be accessed by the entire apps file. So first of all, I have to go to the import again, and this time I'm going to be importing store, which is coming from .store.index.js, and we need to be inserting this particular store as a props to this particular provider. And by doing that, we're able to have the store to be installed, to be inserted inside the provider, and the provider will be making it available for the entire app. And the next thing is basically to apply Redux in multiple components. Okay, of course, this is basically to have the particular Redux function to be accessed across multiple components. So let's get started by implementing it on just one of the components. So first of all, I have to go to our code, and in our code right here, I have to go to app.jsx file, and there you go. This is just a simple dummy that we have just created, and here I'll like to call two components, and that two components will be having this counter functions. So first of all, I have to create a new folder inside source, and this time I'm going to call components. And first of all, I have to create a new file called counter1. Yeah, it's a JSX file, by the way. So counter1 is where I like to have a simple counter UI. So first of all, I have to have RAFCE as well. So you are able to have this boilerplate functional component, and I like to paste this particular counter UI, which will be used in our counter right here. Just need to be copying and pasting it right inside here, and you just need to be importing counter1 back into our app.jsx right here. So I'm just going to say counter1 like this, and this is coming from our components folder. So this can import it first. So import counter1 like this, and this counter1 is actually coming from counter1 as well. And of course, we need to make sure to name this particular file with a capital C like this, so that it will be most suitable. Counter1 like this, and of course, we need to make sure to name this particular function to be capital C like this, so that we are able to access it right here and also right here as well. And there you go. And now we are able to see in our browser, we are able to have this particular UI, which just say counter app. So let's just put counter app1 like this. Just put 1 right here. You're able to have this particular 1, and this is going to be the first component, which is going to be counter app1. So inside this particular counter app1 is where I like to call the Redux variable that we have set in our store and in our reducers as well. So in order to access the initial state that we have set in our Redux counter reducer right here, we need to be calling use selector function. So use selector is one of the functions that is used to access the data that's being stored in our store. So first of all, I have to import used selector, and this use selector is coming from React-Redux like this. And using use selector, we are able to access the value of the initial state. So in this case, I have to copy use selector and go to our counter 1 right here, and we need to be using a variable, newly created variable. Just say constant equals to count, and we can place the use selector function right after here. And this use selector is actually a function as well. Inside here, you'll be able to have a parameter like just say state, and that state is basically the object, and we need to be able to have access to that particular object. So just by saying state dot counter that we wanted to access, and dot count is basically the value of the particular reducer's initial state. So we are able to use this particular count, and we can just copy count, and we can just, instead of just 0 right here, you can just place this particular curly braces and place count right here. And if in our browser, and as you can see right here, there's no, there might be some error. So I think I've forgotten to import the name of this particular counter slicer. I forgot to import this particular counter slicer, which is the reducer, into our store right here. And inside our store that I have given earlier, I've made it like an empty reducer right here. We need to be making sure to call the name of this particular reducer. So in this case, I'm just going to say counter reducer. So counter reducer is coming from this particular file /reducers/counter reducer. And not just that, of course, we must be able to creating another object that surrounds the count right here. So in this case, we need to be wrapping this particular count with another curly braces, and this particular curly braces is basically an object for counter. And by doing that, we're able to have our value that is coming from the Redux initial state like this. And at the moment, we can't add or minus this particular value because we have not set the function to change the value. It's just to access the value that's coming from counter reducer. So in our counter 1, as you can see right here, we're able to have the value that's coming from the Redux. Directly we're able to access it. And right now, what happens when we click on minus, and what happens when we click on plus? So first of all, I like to have like an on click function. So in this case, I'll say on click, and this particular on click trigger will be calling a function that actually increases the value of the variable. So this can say handle increment, just like this. And of course, I like to call this particular function, I like to initialize the function just by saying constant handle increment. It's going to be a function, an arrow function, and inside this arrow functions where I like to call this particular increment function that we have set in our counter reducer right here. In order to call this particular increment, we just need to be importing at the top right here. So in order to call import increment, and this particular increment is coming from store/reducers/counter reducer, just like this. We need to be calling it right inside here. But this is not how actually Redux works. We can't just directly make changes to a particular value of Redux. We need to be calling use dispatch function to update the value of the Redux that's coming from the Redux store. So first of all, I have to go to this particular import right here, and I have to import use dispatch function. And just like this use dispatch function is where we are able to use it to update the value or to change the value of the initial state. So first of all, I have to have right below this particular count right here, I need to make sure to create a new variable called dispatch, in which we are able to make use of the use dispatch function, just like this. And using this dispatch, we are able to put it inside this particular function. Just place the increment and place it inside the dispatch function like this. And by doing this, we are able to find in our code right here, when we click on minus, as you can see right here, when you click on the minus button right here, we don't actually find any difference because that's an issue in our code again. As you can see here, we have used state.count, and we of course need to be calling, we're actually accessing this particular initial state. So we need to be including the counter. So copy this and just need to be placing it right after state dot right here, and of course also right here in our decrement function as well. And by doing this, we're able to have, when we go to our code right here, when we click on minus, of course, we need to be making sure to add decrement and not for the minus right here. And this particular decrement should be, this particular increment is meant for this particular plus button, and we need to be calling handle decrement, which is another new function. We need to be calling it, and right, which is should be placed right below the first function, handle decrement. And in this case, I like to call exactly like how we have done before, dispatch, and this dispatch will be calling decrement instead. Yeah, of course, need to be importing decrement as well. Right after our increment right here, just need to place decrement like this. And right after we have done that, we're able to have this particular plus and minus button to be working. As long as you're able to plus and minus this particular button, you are able to have, you are actually changing the value of the Redux directly from your component. Now the next thing is just, it's going to be, I like to show you that we are able to access the same value. We are able to edit and change the same value across multiple components. So let's go back to our code right here, and in our app.jsx file, I like to create another new component. In this case, I like to create a new file called counter2. I'm just going to say counter2.jsx, and in this case, I'm just going to be making sure to just copy exactly like how we have done for counter1. Just copy exactly like this, paste it inside counter2, and just change counter1 here just to 2 like this, and just change it to 2 here as well. And what does this mean? We are actually replicating another component, and that component can do the same thing to the same initial state we have done. So in our app.jsx, we just need to be calling counter2 like this, and let's go to our browser, and there you go. You're able to have this two counter app1 right here and counter app2 right here. So we must be able to, let's say if I click minus the first value right here, even the bottom value changes as well. And this means is that we are actually accessing the same value, and we are able to edit and change the same initial state as well. And this is basically the basic idea of Redux, where we are able to access the same variable across multiple platforms. And those are just the basic idea on how to actually make use of Redux in a typical Redux project. So that's the end of this particular part of the video. Let's catch up on the next one.